Hey, PMSer, listen, I hear you, and I just want to ask you something. So, you take your vitamins every day, your younger friends make fun of you for it, but, screw them because you're taking care of yourself, even if it makes you look like an old lady with a pill box. You take care of yourself. You remember to drink water. You eat 3 meals a day. But what are you doing about your PMS? You cry, you have chocolate, and you seclude yourself, and you put yourself in a corner, and you avoid contact with people because Lord knows what you're going to do. But let me tell you what you should do. So the folks that make Jubilance, right, is a natural PMS supplement. That's right. All you Trader Joe buying, like Sprouts buying people that all want the organic and the natural. This is for you too, okay? Like I can't afford to live that lifestyle, but I can afford to have Jubilance in my life, okay? It's only 2 ingredients. One of them is vitamin C, okay? I kid you not, this is not a medical claim, but I was on my PMS time, and I also was going through a cold, and my cold did not last as long as it usually does, and I don't think it's a coincidence, but you guys should try it and do it yourself. But listen, get yourself a bottle of Jubilance. And let me tell you what. Let me sweeten the deal for you a little bit. Follow the link in the description of this episode, and it'll give you 10% off your subscription order of their bottles. That's right. And it'll also get you the discount on a one-time bottle order in case you want to, try it out before you decide to get the monthly subscription. Okay. So yeah, check it out and take care of yourself. There ain't nothing wrong with taking care of yourself. There's other people that you gotta take care of in your life. Sure, your mom's calling you every day wondering how you're doing, but you're really taking care of her. Your younger siblings, you're taking care of them, but you need to take care of yourself, sister. Get yourself a bottle and email me and tell me what you think. And that's the scoop. Okay, that's what I want to know. So yeah, follow the description, get a bottle, and get your life together. 'Cause you're already doing great, but we could all be better. Yeah. Hello. Welcome to Tampon Talk with Mary. Welcome to the show that only airs once a month. Quick story. I was trying to think about it. I think it's part of my quick story from one of the latest episodes we recorded. But I had a really, really bad period this month. I was in bed the entire day just cramping. But there's this really I was cramping so much, and I don't want to try to find the right analogy to describe this texture. But I was cramping and laying down, and then when I got up, it all came out if you sort of cut up gelatin, and it just went all out. It's really very nasty, and I didn't think that I visualized my vagina muscles just chopping up my uterus and throwing it out. But anyway, it was really bad, and I hope that visual got across to everybody in all its nitty-gritty detail. Anyway, I'm really excited to bring on my guest, Miss Steph Garcia from the Ruby in LA. Hi, hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. It's a bright, sunshiny day.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm a writer and performer based out of Los Angeles, originally from, New Jersey, New York. And I perform and write at the Ruby, and I'm also on the faculty there as well. And I also host a period podcast.
Yes, yeah, we were talking about this, and it's I was so excited to geek out about periods.
Yeah. They're some of my favorite things to talk about, and whenever anybody brings it up or asks for a tampon or a pad, I'm like, yes, here it is. Show it. Loud and proud.
I love this period journey that we're taking together, and I feel like we're in the right climate, and it actually I feel like it's always been the right climate to talk about periods, but suddenly now everybody's catching on,
So I originally started. Sorry, hold on, my dog's going crazy. Let me let her out. So when I started the podcast, I had originally started it because it was 2016, and the Chinese swimmer, I don't know if you saw at the Olympics, with Fu Yanwei. She was like, oh, I was slow because I'm on my period. Not that that's an excuse, and it was this what? why did she say that on an interview? And it's like, because it's the truth, probably. And it was just like mind blowing to me. So that was part of the reason that I was like, what? People don't just talk about this stuff. And not that I was, it's funny because I don't like really consider myself an activist. There are people who do it way better than I do. But it was like one of those moments where I was like, oh, well, I know how to talk, so I'll do that. I can talk a lot about a lot of things. But since starting to do it, it's just become more and more that I'm like, oh, there's so many people doing it. And it's so wonderful to see how many more people are just like, hey, this is a thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it shouldn't be anything that that you need to be ashamed of or like embarrassed of, or even the health implications of it. You know what I mean? Like, people need to talk more about it so that you can figure out how to deal with your own menstruation.
Yeah, and I think I've been trying to like explore it with like this show, or just like talking about it, is that like, why is it stigmatized, and like challenging that, you know, because it's like exactly right, like we should be talking about it, but like, why don't we?
Yeah, it's so dumb. And but it is 100% getting better, and there's like so many organizations and even TV shows just like kind of putting it there. And there's, I don't know if you've seen that Amy Schumer sketch about tampons.
Oh, yes.
That's great. It's so good.
Yeah. I guess it's kind of like, it segues us into a little bit about, like the Ruby, if you wanted to kind of talk to us about that real quick, like what you guys are doing, in regards to being a comedy school. I think it used to be like the Nerd Melt.
It used to be, it wasn't Nerd Melt. How the structure worked was we were in the same building and it was the same parent company, but Nerd Melt was one theater and we were a smaller theater called the Nerdist.
Oh, yes.
Nerdist theater stage. And so we were improv and sketch, whereas Nerd Melt was more like stand-up, storytelling, and podcasting.
Oh, okay.
They had some sketch, but not a ton. And so that's where it was. And then in April, it was like the full launch. It had already been in the works. And Lindsay, who I've known almost basically since I moved to LA, she and Jen and Randy had been working on this idea for the theater of, intersectional feminism, inclusion, like, building up these voices that don't necessarily have the stage time or the support at other places. They wanted to be that place for all these voices. And that's kind of the thing that the Ruby, is built on, is not saying like, oh, here's how you be funny. It's like, let's figure out what you find funny, what's funny about you, and how do we amplify that and make it accessible and like, to tell your story, whatever that story is, and amplify the voices, really. So it's live shows, but they also have a podcast booth, and actually the podcast booth is also doubles as their nursing and pumping room, which I absolutely love that they have.
I love that.
Yeah, and they have a little fridge in there, so if you when you pump, you can put your breast milk in there. And then they also have free tampons and pads in their bathrooms.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. And so they're always looking, and that's the beauty too, is that the Ruby overall is super open to learning, right? Like if there's a voice or a community that they aren't necessarily serving, or maybe like that feels there might be something, that they could do better, they're open to hearing that. It's not like, no, there's no space for that. It's like, no, absolutely. We want to hear from everybody and figure out how to make everyone feel welcome and learn from each other,
Yeah. Which I think is, I don't want to say it's like very like new to comedy right now, I guess, but just because I feel like there's this idea where if you are seen as taking comedy seriously, you're not doing comedy right. But
like the whole point is that you're doing it seriously in order for it to be funny, and then approaching it like this way, it's like, no, we're seriously looking at inclusion, we're seriously looking at like people we're not serving, and that's where like we can find like, you know, people in comedy and truth, which is like awesome.
Yeah, truth and comedy, 100%. And I think like that's also part of what people are seeing now, is that there was always dominant voices, and we're not saying like those voices have to go away. It's just like what comedy was because of these dominant voices, and now there's like all these other voices being like, yeah, you think that's funny because this is a perspective you don't have to think about. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think like that's where comedy has become more serious, is because we're getting like people who have not had the platform before are getting the platform, and they're like, well, we want to not only make you laugh, but maybe like let's have a dialogue while we're doing it. I mean, the Netflix specials are just rife with all that stuff right now.
Yeah. Like,
yeah.
And that's like a whole like interesting path for comedy too, because I feel like the real like major comedy players that have at least, I don't want to say like made it, you know, but have gotten their voices heard the most are coming out of like LA or Chicago or New York, and then, you know, Netflix has like given them this like, you know, where they could pop out of the woodworks and come out of like where they could just go right to Netflix, which I feel like is really another good way to like get the voices that we haven't heard before, like talking about these kind of things.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's no really other easy way to segue into the next. So I'm making that sound so bad, but it's not. Is that I invite my guests that come on the show to share a tampon terror story if they have one. If the male equivalent is boner burden, sometimes people have stories. People have stories for both, but I don't know if you had an embarrassing story that you wanted to share.
Yeah, so it's funny because on my podcast, it's mainly a storytelling podcast. I do some interviews, but that I actually will be sharing one story this upcoming season, but that's not the one I'll share right now. One of the other ones I've talked about on my podcast before is that so when I was in high school, well, when I got my period, my mom only used the overnight Kotex, like the really thick ones with no wings. And so I was always like leaking everywhere. And like my best friend growing up did sports and stuff, so she actually used tampons, but I don't know, I just like didn't want to ask or whatever it was. And so I didn't. And so then I went to school, and I actually started school at 17, I went to college and I started at 17. And so I was like, okay, you know, I'm in college, would probably learn to use a tampon. And for some reason, to this day, I'm like, this was the most idiotic move. I was like definitely dehydrated. I don't even think I was on my period. And I had just gotten out of the shower. So I was like super hot on top of everything else. And so I tried to put in this tampon, and I like basically passed out.
oh my God.
I was like, this is awful. And then I had to pull it out, and it was so dry. So then on top of like already like having passed out in like a towel. So I'd like just gotten out of the shower. And so I passed out onto the toilet, and I was like, oh my God, this is awful. And then I had to pull it out, and it was so dry and it hurt so bad. And I was like, I'm such a dummy. And so it took me a minute, like, you know, then I tried again when I was like on my period and everything was fine. And I was like, oh, okay. But it was like one of those things where I didn't want to ask anybody. And I was like, so not the person who, I mean, I've like never been the person who's been in tune with her body, unfortunately, which I like very much advocate for now. Now I'm a little bit better about it, but I was just like never that person. And so I just didn't pay attention to any of it. And it was just really, really dumb. And so, yeah, I still remember that. I was like, I like passed out in the toilet in like my dorm room. And I was like praying that no one found me, because God, I didn't want to have to tell anybody that story.
I couldn't even imagine, like, say, like, a roommate walking into the room and just you in that scenario. It's like, see, what had happened was,
yeah, and then, like, it's, yeah. Yeah, and then, like, it's, yeah. It's like, could you show me how to do this? Which is
Or
always
about-
fascinating to me when I hear those stories of, I'm like, people showed you?
Yeah, what? Like,
Yeah. Like they get up all in there and stuff, and it's crazy to me. I mean, it's great, but I'm always like, people did that
wow.
with tampons?
That's a friend for life, though. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
somebody that's willing to, like, put a tampon there, like, deserves a first baby that comes out of it. You know what I mean?
Right. Just take this.
Yeah, just a huge. This was life changing. Here, a child. Like,
Yeah. Oh man. Oh man.
oh, God.
Yeah. But it's one of those things, eventually I learned how to use a tampon. And I just got the cup, so I'm gonna learn how to use that too.
oh yes, yeah. I
Yeah.
like the cup. I go between the Diva cup, or there's tampons that you could buy without the applicator that are like way cheaper than ones with the applicator for some reason.
Yeah.
But I fluctuate between both. But yeah, there's two folds to the cup, so you gotta find your fold.
I know. I was like playing with it. I was like, oh. But I'm not going to try and use it before my period comes. I learned that about the tampons. It's probably the same about the cup.
Yep.
But yeah, I had the cup, and I had an IUD for a while, and the Thinx panties, I did the one, so I'm like, I'll try them.
They're so great. Like, yeah, those are the bomb. I think I bought it was like when they, I think, first started out, where they just had like 3 like panties on the site, and now they've just like blown up, which is awesome. I'm so happy for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The more the merrier. Bring it on.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
speaking on periods, and you have a podcast, I want now, as someone with a period podcast, let me just say I'm a big fan, even though just because I love that you're doing that. I don't know if you, so like, talk to us a little bit about like your, like, so you were talking about like storytelling, like what, how do you do your period podcast? Let's talk about it.
Sure. Well, the name of the podcast is That's My Story, period. And
Nice.
it's, and like I said, originally I was like, well, the main thing, like, I know how to do is talk. And so I also know a lot of like super funny people who menstruate. And so I was like, they probably all want to talk too. And so I just started asking people, and I started recording stories. And so then the first season was only 6 episodes. No, 5, 6, but each episode had 3 stories. So there was like a lot of stories. And then the second season, I was like, oh, well, now that I'm getting into this, like, I'd love to actually talk to, like I said, I'm like, there are people who do this better than I do. And so I'd like to talk to them. And so I started talking to people. And so then now this season coming up is going to be even, I just keep changing up the form. Screw you guys. It's my podcast. I can do what I want. So what I did this season is the storytelling episodes will actually have some factual stuff in between the stories of like, what's going on with period legislation, or like different stuff in the news about periods and menstruation. Because like globally, America has issues with how we treat menstruation, and how it, period poverty, and how that affects primarily girls in the education system when they're growing up and stuff. And then, of course, homeless women and people who menstruate. And there's just a lot that in America, it really does affect. And we still have a stigma to it, too. Like, it's getting better, but, it still exists. But globally, I mean, every culture just really treats it differently. And so there's more spotlight on it, which is really fantastic. And I think like those things are changing globally too. But there's still work to be done. So I just figured, again, I talk. So like, why not just add that little element in where I'll just talk about all these things. And then, like I said, I actually add a story this season. I had an ectopic pregnancy, which I don't know if you know what that is.
No.
It's where I guess it's fertilized. It's fertilized egg gets stuck in a fallopian tube, so then they have to do It's bad. Yeah, sometimes it resolves itself. Mine didn't, and I actually lost a fallopian tube. But it was part of like what I in the story just talk about is like like I said, like I've never been in tune with my body, and part of what happened is because I started doing this podcast and all this stuff. I I just got it checked out soon enough that like it didn't burst and I didn't have internal bleeding and all that stuff. So, so I talk about that, which is not fun. I mean, there's funny parts to the story. I promise you it's not like a total depressing story. But I think like stuff like that, like I was saying earlier, like the health implications, are part of it too. It's not just there because of like this stigma and the taboo, right? Then like when you're at a doctor's office, you feel like you shouldn't talk about it because it's not that bad. And I hate that sentiment of like, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. Like, sure, it might not be that bad, but if you're like even remotely concerned about it, then your caregiver should also be concerned about it. Do you know what I mean? Like we shouldn't feel like, I feel like, you know, women are very strong. We're super fucking strong.
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean like we shouldn't take care and advocate for ourselves either. And I think like there's, you know, a back and forth about that. And so, you know, the whole thing of like, it's not that bad is like, I'm not saying don't get over things and don't work through things so you can come out stronger on the other side, for sure. Do that. But at the same time, like when it's happening, like you need to be in touch with who you are and what you're feeling, what you're going through, and advocate for other people to take it seriously.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, I mean, pointing out a very, like obvious double standard of, like, well, let's say, for example, like, a guy can go into a doctor's office, and if there's something wrong with him that's even very simple, is that it's taken very seriously, but for some reason, there's, like, this emotional association with periods, where it's like, oh, well, you know, it's, like, overreacting, or whatever, and, which is, like, very much not the case, I think 99% of the time, so, like...
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I had a guest on my show that she talked about endometriosis and how one person had told her, and like she was single, not married, not, you know, didn't want kids, at least at that point, and she had a doctor tell her that if she had a kid, that would help resolve the endometriosis.
What?
And I was like, I know. And I was like, but then you have a kid. That's... And it's not even a guarantee. Do you know what I mean? Like, so then you have this child. It was just like mind boggling that that was the suggestion. But that was a belief, like, you know, like have a kid and that'll help, you know, anyway. So it's pretty interesting to me how, again, like, you know, like you're saying, like how people approach periods and without really, and sometimes it's people who don't menstruate and you're just like, how do you even know? Like you've never dealt with this. Anyway, so yeah, I've advocate. Screw everybody else. If you're feeling it, you're feeling it, and that's what matters.
I don't know what like 19 like that 50s doctor like your friend went to that's like smoking a cigarette in the office is like, you just need to have a baby, you know?
Oh, well, just have a baby, yo, woman. That's what you do. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. So anyway, the podcast. It's a whole lot of stories. My eventual hope, fingers crossed, is to get them animated. Because how it works on the show is that I actually don't talk when they tell the stories. Everyone knows that they have to come in, and that they're going to have their time to just tell their story. And then afterwards we talk about periods and everything. But so the stories are all clean in terms of their telling of them, and that's the eventual hope, is to have someone animate them so they can live on YouTube. What's next? Let's say YouTube. I don't know, maybe Snapchat or IGTV. I don't know, whatever's next, I'll put it anywhere. But yeah, that's the eventual hope, because the more people that hear and see it, the better. Is all.
Yeah, definitely. And like, I guess in sort of like finding you know, like what's been working or what's not working. Do you feel like have you run into, say, like the pros or cons of talking about like the period stigma? Because I think like it's hard to at least for like, say, people that I know that know I do a podcast, but they will choose not to listen to it because they're like, oh, well, I don't want to hear you talking about your period. But they're missing the opportunity of to, like you're saying, like learn something new, or a perspective they don't understand, or just like a good laugh that they wouldn't have gotten somewhere else. But like, have you run into that kind of stuff where people are hesitant or not hesitant or that kind of thing?
You know, I haven't, which is really nice.
That's awesome.
I'm blessed. Hashtag blessed. I'm blessed to be, especially like the Ruby and just like a lot of people here in LA, you know, I think are open to hearing about it and learning about it and supporting each other in their causes or like, you know, what is important to them. So I thankfully haven't. And when I do, I really, I just push harder, and because it's like almost, you know, anytime someone's like, oh, I don't want to hear about it or whatever, I just push harder because I'm like, then that means you're the person that should hear the most about it. And that's the only way that it's going to become normal and something that like, and I like, if it gets to the point where, you know, straight guys are like, hey, here's a tampon, like, yeah, let's do that.
We did it. Like, we've done it.
How did we get there? You know? So but again, yeah, I haven't really run into too much of that. The thing I actually run into more is like a lot of women being like, I don't know, I don't have a story. I don't know. I don't think I'd have to think about it. And so that's kind of cool too, because it means that they never really had to deal with anything, and I'm like, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm also like, I feel like everyone's bled on something at some point in their life.
That's what I'm saying, and it's just like, I don't know. It's, and I guess it's sometimes people are maybe like uncomfortable to like admitting that, but I think that's what makes it funny is that like that happened.
Yeah. I remember like when, so I'm married, but like when my husband and I first started living together, I bled on the bed at some point. I can't even remember. This was super early on. And it like instantly, because it was like overnight. So I woke up in the morning, like I didn't even realize it. And so it was like instantly it pushes you back to like being 12, you know, like, and being like, oh God. And then on top of it, like I have this man who like, what is he going to think of it? And he's like, you know, at this point too, he hears about periods all the time. So, but he's like, it's no big deal. And I'm like, you don't understand. And it's like hard to even explain that to someone who's like, it's fine. Like you clean the sheets and, you know, move on. Mm-hmm. But to try and explain that kind of like deep seated idea that sits with you from when you're in your adolescence, and like all that stuff just like drudges up, even though it's like a stain on, you know, a bed sheet that you can wash out, and the person who you have to share that bed with could give two shits. Yeah. You're still like, it doesn't matter. Like that's still all inside me. So it's just really interesting. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of like, yeah, because I feel like part of like learning about your period, like when you're very young, is like the shame connotation. And how very like normalized that is. I mean, I'm definitely not like say that there's people that are like free bleeders. Like I'm like accidentally a free bleeder. Like, so yeah. I could never think of like deliberately choosing to do that. But yeah, just the kind of transitioning from the adolescence into adulthood attitude about it, where it's like, hey, this happens, let's just, you know, move on. But you're right, we're kind of like, there is this like deep kind of like shame, but I think it probably comes from just like first learning about it, or just the immediate reaction of embarrassment or like that kind of thing. But yeah.
Yeah, it's always there. But yeah, it gets better.
Yeah.
Hopefully. And we're just trying to make it better. We're working towards making it better for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so where can we find your podcast? Where can we find you and follow your things and the Ruby and all the social media?
So let me get the. So I'm at Most Steph Love. That's MO Steph STEPH and then Love. And that's on that's on Instagram and Twitter both are that. And then the Ruby on Twitter is _Ruby_LA. And then I'm just making sure that that's the same one on Instagram. Before I share it's the same on Instagram. The _Ruby_LA. There's shows every weekend at the Ruby. So you just kind of have to check out therubyle.com to see what shows are playing. I'm on a team called the Money Pit, and we perform once a month, the third Saturday of the month. We have our best of show coming up. And then the podcast is That's My Story Period, and that's on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and it's on a network called Campfire, who's absolutely wonderful. And the third season should be coming out in February next year. I think that's all of my stuff.
Awesome. Dope. And then, we can throw the links to everything in the description so people can find them there also, which will be dope. But did you have any final thoughts or anything we did not cover that needs to be covered right in this moment?
No, I don't know. I think just respect one another and learn from one another. And, we're all just trying to get through life at the end of the day. So let's just all be kind. That's probably it. I don't know if that's too hippy dippy hoity toity. I don't know. But I'm always we're all here to learn from one another. So let's just do that.
Yeah. No, I don't think that's hippy dippy hoity toity. I think that's a nice little bow to put on the end of this episode.
I don't even hippy dippy and hoity toity are two very different things. I don't even know why I said that together. All right.
Yeah, and then you Tampon Talk listeners, follow them. Follow Steph. Go follow our Steph. Listen to her podcast because we need more people talking about periods. That is dope. Follow our media. We're Tampon Talk W Mary on Twitter and Instagram. Like us on Facebook. Email us tampontalkwithmary@gmail.com. I think that's all the media. You can follow me on Instagram, but Tampon Talk probably needs it more than me. For the greater good. Anyway, so if you're a bleeder, keep on bleeding. Do your thing. If you're not a bleeder, have some empathy for someone that does. And maybe we can all just laugh about it. All right.
Yes.
Yes. Cool. We'll see you next time on Tampa Talk with Mary. There's no easy way to close out a show. It's like leaving a voicemail. But anyway, bye.